Afternoon, everyone. I'm Melissa Day Murray, Executive Director here at Highwater Women. Welcome to our session on Women in Venture Capital. This is part one of a two-part series. The second part is coming up on October 27th. I hope that you will catch that as well. A quick hello to those of you who are joining us for the replay of this session. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Highwater Women. Highwater Women is a volunteer-based organization whose mission is the economic empowerment of women and youth. We do that through three core programs, and I want to tell you a little bit about each one of those. In 2005, we launched our first program, the annual Backpack Drive. This occurred when one of our board members was approached by a group here in New York City called Women in Need. This organization wanted to provide their families with backpacks filled with school supplies so that their kids could go back to school with everything they needed to start the school year right. Since then, we have provided almost 151,000 kids with school supplies. In 2009, in response to a growing concern that many women and underserved youth were not provided with the necessary tools for financial success, we launched our campaign for financial literacy together with Muriel Siebert and the Siebert Foundation. Today, we train and deploy individuals and corporate volunteers to teach our curriculum and have reached more than 10,000 people through this program. In 2013, we held our first Impact Investing Symposium. At the time, we were the only impact conference in New York City. Since then, we have held more than 122 individual sessions on impact topics and have grown our network to nearly 1,500 people, 79% of whom are women. To stay up to date on what we are doing with our impact programming, please consider becoming a member. You can learn more about that by visiting hwwimpact.org/membership. Now back to today's session and Valerie. Valerie is a member of our Young Women's Council and our Impact Committee, and she can help take us into today's session. Valerie.
As Alyssa mentioned, my name is Valerie Yun. I'm an Associate Director at Digest Market and member of the Impact Committee and Young Women's Council. Again, really excited to welcome you all to this session, and we will move over to the agenda for today. So this will be an hour-long session, so it's a little bit shorter and a little bit more punchy than some of the other webinars we've done in the past. Then we'll open it up to the floor for any Q&A for about 15 minutes, and we'll wrap up in the remaining 5 minutes. So we'll be quick and sweet, and hopefully we'll have an engaging audience. And with that, I will turn it over to Gayatri, who is the founder and general partner of Advaita Capital and the founder of She VC, and she will be moderating the session for today. Gayatri, I'll leave it to you. Take it away.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Valerie, for including me in this. And a little bit about my background. I'm the founder of She VC, which is the storytelling platform purely focused on women and diverse GPs and LPs. And my background is I'm a former Goldman Sachs, former Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. I used to manage US Treasuries assets for US military and Navy. Had a successful consulting company, had been in the venture space for quite some time, but mostly from the institutional side. And I'm super excited to be now starting ESG and DEI focused venture fund, mostly towards growth and late stage. And yeah, we are woman minority owned fund. And we have some amazing woman trailblazing GPs with us today who had raised successfully their fund one and consecutive funds. And I'm super excited to welcome them. Why don't we start right now without much further ado? So maybe we'll start with Shu. Do you want to give a little bit background about yourself and where you are investing, a little bit on your investment thesis?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the whole team for making this event possible. And Gayatri, thank you so much for hosting again. So hi, everyone. This is Shwo here. I run a venture fund full-time based out of Silicon Valley, where we focus on seed stage investments in B2B startups that power future of work. And outside of this role, I've been teaching on the faculty at UC Berkeley and predominantly focused on entrepreneurship and emerging tech. So in both of these roles, really have seen a number of wonderful startups emerge. But what has been quite interesting is that backtracking a little bit, I actually started my career as a founder myself. After our startup exited, I joined Goldman Sachs as well. So Gayatri and I are both GS alum. I was in very traditional tech investment banking, covering a number of deals, everything from what we considered early stage to IPOs, M&As, and strategic financing transactions. And so have really seen everything in the world of startups, from firsthand as a founder to much later stage. And of course, now back to working with early stage startups as an investor. So excited to share with you all a little bit what we've seen that are exciting trends over the last couple of years in these different perspectives, and excited to chat more with Brittany and Gayatri as well. Thanks.
Absolutely. That's amazing. So we have two amazing other GPs though. So why don't we start with Brittany? Brittany, do you want to give a little bit background about what you guys are doing with Coyote Ventures and amazing work that has gone into it?
Thank you. You may notice that that is not me on the screen. That is my amazing co-founder, who unfortunately is unable to speak today. And so I'm filling in for her like a good co-founder does. But definitely follow her on LinkedIn. So my name is Dr. Brittany Barreto. I am a geneticist turned founder turned investor. I'm a serial entrepreneur, having launched the first nationwide DNA-based dating app called Faramore. That was a whole lot of fun, being venture-backed and building and growing that company. And then I worked in venture for Capital Factory. It's the most active fund in Texas. I was tasked with launching their Gulf Coast branch. That was a whole lot of fun. And I learned a lot about what's actually happening behind closed doors with investors. Having been a founder previously, I had really thought investors were the bee's knees. They knew everything. They were financial geniuses. But once I was in the room with them, I realized that founders didn't need to be as afraid of investors as I had always felt. That is actually when I caught the femtech bug. So femtech is innovation in women's health and wellness. It is not female founder specific, although most of our founders are women solving their own problems. It's really about the sex and gender of the products that it's addressing. So improving women's health, including conditions that solely, disproportionately, or differently affect women. I started a podcast called Femtech Focus. Femtech Focus today is the main artery of the femtech industry. And over the last 2 years, I've really brought together the industry worldwide. Now Femtech Focus has proprietary databases on the industry and startups, and Jessica and I got together and started Coyote Ventures. Coyote Ventures is an early stage, mostly seed investment firm investing in early stage women's health startups. And I am very grateful to be here today.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have some great things to say about Femtech Femtech podcast that they are doing. So let's go to Lindsay. She's a GP at Helm. Lindsay, why don't you just introduce yourself and the amazing work that you guys are doing at Helm and the investments that you guys have done?
Sure. It's a pleasure to join everyone. Can you see me okay? I don't see myself for some reason. Okay. Maybe better that way. I am also a serial entrepreneur. My background is in the women's rights space, which led me to recognize the real schism in funding for women outside of philanthropy, and wanted to create a platform that made it easy to invest in women, both for founders to secure capital and also for investors to put money into female founders who were doing great work. We are a generalist seed stage fund. We invest in game-changing companies that are founded and led by women. One of the things that is most central to our thesis is acknowledging that of the very small amount of venture capital, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, about 2.3% of which goes to women. Of that capital, there is a disproportionate amount that only goes to CPG and consumer-oriented companies. And we feel really strongly that a lot of the innovation happening in underrepresented industries and sectors outside of that are where the future lies. And so we raised and deployed our first fund in 2018, and we've seen a lot of success with that. Most notably, a company called TIA, which is reimagining women's healthcare, and just closed their Series B, $100 million Series B at a reported $600 million valuation. So really excited to see them, disrupting this space and to be able to be in partnership with them. And now we're raising our second fund, same thesis. We've already invested in 5 companies, which I'm happy to share more about. And appreciate you all having me today and hope I can add some value to the conversation.
Absolutely. So let's start with Lindsay. You have come from nonprofit background, and you said, I'm going to start a fund, and we all are here coming from finance and tech background, and how difficult it is, specifically if you're a woman starting a fund, first time funds. I would love to start with your experience, how it was starting a fund, coming from nonprofit to for-profit, and if you can talk about how you crossed the chasm, how did you convince your LPs, hey, I'm a first time fund manager, I'm going to make sure you have great returns and invest in me, believe in me, and join the journey in this long mission. And this is, LP's interest is obviously 10, 12 years or more. So we'd love to know your take on that. And then we will go with other GPs also.
Sure, I'm happy to share. So it's really interesting because part of the story and what ended up being the sort of greatest obstacle to success actually became an even greater catalyst for starting the company. And here's what I mean by that. I'd spent my career, as I mentioned, working in women's rights in a number of different roles, from media to NGO platform to fund girls and women on the nonprofit side. And then I started a consultancy working with high net worths, family offices, and talent on gender lens philanthropic strategies. Excuse me. So I definitely moved in various circles, but never in the space of looking at things for a for-profit return. But ultimately what happened was, after 10 years of doing that work, I was looking around, and all of the metrics that we had been looking at in terms of advancing girls and women, be it access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, women in the C-suite, women in front of and behind the camera, whatever it was, all of these things that we had, dedicated a tremendous amount of resources to philanthropically, we just weren't seeing the sorts of momentum that we were looking to, or social returns that we were looking to see. And I became more and more disenchanted with the space. And so I wanted to better understand what other levers there were for investing in women. And as I spent a year sort of going on a listening tour and having those conversations, the thing that was first notable to me was that philanthropy had become a catch-all for investing in women. So when people were talking about investing in women, what they were really talking about was driving philanthropic capital to women. So that was the first sort of aha moment that I had. And when I was looking at the realities of venture, which we spoke to a little bit earlier, 2.3% of venture going to women, said differently, 98% of the world being built, tailored towards and benefited, from men, and specifically white cis men. It was really stunning to me that, we had never thought about culturally before the implications of something like that. So we felt, it seems shocking to us when we're like, oh, there's sexual harassment, or there's not parental leave, or there is not, fair pay, or whatever there may be. But those institutions weren't created for us. They weren't created to consider us. And so that was a huge aha. And then where this dovetails into your answer is that at that point, I really began wanting to explore what it might look like then to invest in women in a different way. And because I had a really strong network of women in the women's rights space and these philanthropists who are notable on the global stage, I thought, I'm raising a tiny proof of concept fund, $1.5 million. This will be a cakewalk. And very quickly it became obvious that it wasn't. And that was stunning to me. And why that was stunning to me was because I was working with women and men, but predominantly women, who were writing commitments to, a myriad things, but asking them to invest a relatively small check by comparison into a women-built and led company. There was a huge amount of pushback and reticence. And what the second aha was, which really propelled the mission of the company forward, was that women were very comfortable giving their money away, but they were incredibly uncomfortable looking at a return, investing for a return, even if that, invitation to invest mirrored whatever their impact oriented goals were. So it's a very long way of saying that, we started talking about this company in 2016. I only knew of two other funds doing it at the time, Female Founders Fund and BBG, who I want to always honor as really being pioneers in the space. But we were very, very early. And so we felt, both the sort of resistance of the zeitgeist, and we felt the resistance of women who had never been invited to the table, or who were not financially literate, or who did not even have agency over their own capital. And all of those things were shocking and uncomfortable and eye-opening, and have really resulted in us trying to create a platform for making it easy for women to invest in women. So I hope that answers all of your questions.
Yeah, 100%. And I cannot agree with you more that investing in women is not an extension of philanthropy. So totally agree. Now, coming back to Dr. Brittany, so we have, femtech focus, interest, and I would love to dive deep into that, because we have seen the femtech products almost non-existent. And if they're more expensive than products that are same products for male. And, you have been scientists and have been working in this area for so long. What motivated you to get into the business side of it? And I feel like we need people like you, and there's not many. So can you please walk through that entire process, what motivated you, and taking that step forward towards capital deployment?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. So again, femtech for me is not necessarily specific to female founders, but most of our founders are women, which is awesome. But it actually speaks to why is femtech upcoming right now? So it's because, and this is based on, I've done over 150 interviews on my podcast. We've been the leaders of this for 2 years now. The word femtech was only coined about 5 years ago. So it's very new and emerging. There was a lack of women in STEM for so long that, women's problems, as Lindsay was referring to, like paid parental leave and those things, the systems weren't built for us. And so men were not necessarily building medical devices specifically for cesarean C-sections, right? They weren't building medical devices or products for women, because a lot of times society has stigmatized our bodies so much that men don't even know what we're dealing with. They don't even know that 1 in 3 women have urinary incontinence. They don't know about the struggles of breastfeeding, or the pain of miscarriage, right? Because we tell women, don't even tell people you're pregnant till second trimester. So we don't even know about the issues that are occurring. What's really exciting is that now 27% of STEM students are female. And what we're seeing is that these are the women that are experiencing problems. They have PCOS, or they have endometriosis, or they had breast cancer, or they went in for a mammogram and said, why does my breast have to be squished in this giant machine? I work at this company that's building rockets for Mars. That seems illogical. And so these women are taking it into their own hands and creating their own solutions. Now, the next wave that we need is women in investing positions of power, because what happens is that over the last 10 years, as we've seen more and more solutions for women's health, we are seeing a lack of investment in it. To date, there is only 6 femtech specific funds in the world. Of those 6, 4 of us started in the last year. And so this is very, very exciting to see where this is going to go. But for right now, a lot of my founders are pitching to investors and having to literally explain the vagina versus the uterus, or the cervix versus the uterus, or what's an ovary versus the, we are talking, my founders are literally doing sex ed for investors, right? And then the investors oftentimes, it's an N of 1, which is their wife. And if their wife does not have the problem that you're pitching a solution for, a lot of times it doesn't get funded. So that's kind of why we're seeing this wave. All right. And then the last thing I'll speak on, as you referred to, is we have historically seen that products in women's health have been targeted towards the affluent white woman. Now, I used to think that, oh, that's just because I don't know why, maybe because all the founders were affluent white women. I don't know. Well, what we've actually uncovered is that there's been an issue with billing codes. So like literally the layers of barriers to women's health is beyond, it goes so deep. So there's a lack of billing codes. Did you know that endometriosis was still classified as hysteria as of 10 years ago? And today it's still a specialty code, even though 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. So a specialty code means oftentimes your insurance doesn't even cover it. Or sometimes certain medical catalogs don't even have that code in it. And so what happens is that a founder says, I'm going to have a solution for endometriosis. We're going to go 510K FDA route. And the investor says, that's great, but okay, there's no code for it. We don't want to wait 3 years for the government to make a billing code for it. So why don't you go direct to consumer? And when you go direct to consumer with a, let's say a maternal monitor, that's $2,000, who buys that? The affluent white woman, right? More often than not. And then all of a sudden, all the branding gets changed for them and da, 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 da. So actually the issue is billing codes. And if you are not targeting Medicaid, which covers half of the babies delivered in the United States, you're not covering all of women's health, right? Your solution is not really helping all women, of which, we have plenty of time for more shocking statistics, but that's a little bit of the history about why women's health is emerging right now.
No, that's amazing. I think it speaks volume why people need to listen to the Femtech Focus podcast of yours to educate people and also educate a lot of women like ours. And I love that fact that now there's so much of focus funds are coming up. Ours is ESG, yours is Femtech, Helm. Now, from there, let's go to Shuo, because she has been in this space for quite a long period of time in Silicon Valley. And most of our portfolio companies have seen realization in liquidity, acquired by Goldman Sachs, Ford, Caterpillar, Binance, Dialpad. So Shuo, you started this endeavor in 2016. We can call you like a veteran in this space in Silicon Valley, where you're like, in a conference, only woman. So walk us through that journey. What motivated you? I'm going to start a fund, and being in Silicon Valley, where there are not many women fund managers out there. Now there are more, and how the landscape of fundraising has changed.
Thank you, Gayatri. And actually, Brittany and Lindsay, thank you so much for both of your sharing, because I really resonate with both. In fact, before I directly answer your question, Gayatri, I want to backtrack a little bit, because when I started as a founder, honestly, I didn't identify with entrepreneurship the same way that maybe some of my male counterparts would have, because even the whole concept came with different connotations, and there wasn't quite the same kind of representation back when I first started as a founder to make me look at that and be like, that's a real career. I just thought of, I had a problem and therefore I'm going to try to do something about it, and didn't even think of it as entrepreneurship at the time. But of course, when you actually think about the entire ecosystem, there's a lot of pieces that must have gone wrong to kind of perpetrate an issue overall. So first of all, financial literacy is and has not been a topic where it has been provided equally to both men and women, to all ethnicities. In fact, that's certainly one of the areas where education needs to most improve in the US. So actually, my first startup was focusing on providing financial literacy and money management content and software to a lot of major banks and universities. And in that role, certainly came across a lot of the issues that Lindsay mentioned, where if people don't understand the concept of investing, then you kind of blend into this space where, oh, well, in that category, it's only philanthropy. So I feel like a lot of these issues have roots in education. And similarly with what Brittany was sharing earlier, if all these founders have to go out and provide basic sex education to investors and to the ecosystem, that also speaks to how much our educational system is failing us in terms of just even understanding the basics. So I think it's important that we build a stronger ecosystem overall in order to better support entrepreneurs, because in order for entrepreneurs to be successful, they need to be in an environment where they can hire wonderful talent, right? So they do need to be able to have a population that they can go to get them really excited about the product and believe that it has a huge market. On top of that, of course, we need more capital into this space, not just early stage venture capital, but also subsequent rounds. So as you all know, in order for a successful startup to really thrive, they do need to have the whole value chain of capital funding, not just in seed, pre-seed, because then what happens is that all of these female founders have no choice but to either shut down their companies early or they sell prematurely, right? So we really do need later stage capital to come in as well and be supportive. And so I think it's an entire value system that we kind of need to fix over time, but I'm really glad that we're starting with early stage. In fact, I also see a lot more successful female founders later on that are now coming back into the ecosystem to talk about the importance of investing, not just for impact, but also investing for returns and being willing to put their capital where their mouth is and really do invest in the success of other women. And so, Gayatri, to come back to your question, I feel like had I thought about gender too much when I was starting, I likely would not have started. So I honestly just didn't think too much about this particular question. When we had started our fund back in 2016, we actually started doing personal investments since 2014. There wasn't really that much support for diverse managers at that time. And particularly there weren't that many women-run funds, though I was starting to see some other women-led funds starting to emerge across different asset classes, not just venture, but also in hedge funds. And people are starting to actually share these stories more. So one of the things that I really appreciate about technology is that in many ways, it actually lowers the barriers for people to actually have a voice and to spread their message. And as a result of that, that lowering barrier that's enabled by technology has actually enabled more diversity of voices to be heard. And so in many ways, including Brittany's Femtech podcast, now there's more people that can actually learn about what we're talking about in this space. So I do think that technology enables this positive feedback loop where it lowers barriers and enables more diversity of voices, which then hopefully fuels further innovation. And I think when it comes to specifically the space that I'm in, it just so happens that my startup really focused on B2B. And one of the top things I realized, again, it has its roots in our educational ecosystem where we learn a lot as individual consumers, what kind of products we purchase and what we buy, but really we don't have the opportunity to learn about the B2B space when we're in school. In fact, many of the times we don't even know that some of the largest consumer companies that we know about actually has potentially even larger B2B arm, right? For example, even with a major consumer brand like Coca-Cola, if you look at their B2B arm, aka how they sell into grocery stores, how they sell into restaurants, and how they sell to actually direct supermarkets, in many ways, that B2B arm is way bigger than their D2C business. And I think it's oftentimes that we don't have the opportunity to get exposure to that. And so that's actually why I started teaching, so that in my role as faculty, I'm not just teaching entrepreneurs from experience in terms of some of the things that they should know firsthand about the industry, but to get exposed to the concept of it is possible to have a really robust business model selling to other businesses. And so being able to empower women particularly, and also other minorities to think about, well, what are some of the pieces of things that I can leverage? Well, number one, we talked about definitely leveraging technology to do things and to scale their message and voice in unprecedented ways. And then, of course, two, to leverage capital and business models to hopefully scale that. So hopefully those are, there will be more and more tools that we can help leverage going forward that can enable more of that. And of course, supporting female founders with unique struggles, giving them a platform where they feel like they can actually share what they're going through and not feel in a position where they're vulnerable and about to be attacked. In fact, one of the female founders that we had worked very closely with, to what Lindsay and Brittany was saying earlier, she was in the process of a major M&A and actually going through a miscarriage at the same time. And she felt like that wasn't something she could talk about because it would almost demonstrate weakness on her behalf. But how can that demonstrate weakness if it is not something that she can control and it's a part of life? So I think we need to normalize some of these conversations where female founders will fundamentally have different experiences. Same thing with female investors. And that doesn't make them any less of a business leader. And that's certainly something that we need to talk about more. So one of the major things that I've learned is to be authentic, talk about the challenges, not just the successes, and actually normalize that to be a part of the experience and that having no impact on the success of women's careers.
I cannot agree with you more, because I remember in my previous funds when I was on the market, I did not share that I was pregnant because I did not know how the implications are going to be around it. So that means like the environment has not been helpful to us when we are sharing information like that compared to what it is right now. And I feel like people will look at this as a weakness. Oh, you will be out, you will not be available to work. So I completely agree with you. And let's talk about the best practices. And I would love to start with Shua, because you have already deployed at Fund One, and I think you've already deployed Fund Two, right? So let's talk about the best practices, and starting from sourcing deals. What have you learned, especially the lessons learned from your past deployments and fundraising? If you can talk a little bit about it. And there will be a lot of listeners who might be interested to come as an LP, or maybe interested to start their own fund. So if you can walk us through that journey, that would be great. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Gayatri, you're spot on. We're actually now towards the end of Fund Two and about to kick off Fund Three. So definitely learned a lot throughout the process and continuing to learn more. So what's really exciting about this job is, of course, on the one hand, our job is to learn about what's exciting and happening in the industry. And of course, on the other hand, to deploy capital in a way that aligns with our values. And so lessons along the way, everything from how to fundraise and develop LP relationships, authentic relationships, not just relationships that we say is a relationship, but where we can't necessarily be very honest in sharing information and advice with each other, to how to source companies, how to be helpful and add value to our founders, all the way to even helping them strategize on how to exit and think about, is this M&A, is this a pre-IPO process? So fortunately now we have a number of portfolio companies that have since been acquired by Fortune 50 companies, several of which are now in the pre-IPO process that we've invested since the seed stage. So definitely seen founders, but also their respective teams evolve through different stages. If anything, I feel like there's specific learning points, but if I were to talk about kind of some of the biggest lessons, the first thing that I've really learned is thinking about building a broader ecosystem. So to complement the work that we do on the fund side, as much as we could do within the fund, it's limited by a for-profit entity. And so if we were trying to empower more founders, more diverse founders, if we wanted to empower a stronger ecosystem, we did need to do more beyond kind of what we could do within the fund. So to complement the work that we do at the fund, my business partner and I actually co-founded a nonprofit community this is a little bit more than 10 years ago, that has since over time grown rapidly. And of course, this community even predates the start of our fund. So this nonprofit is called Decode, and has since evolved to become the largest tech and innovation community that's co-hosted with Berkeley and Stanford. And actually, since the pandemic, with everything going virtual, they've expanded beyond the West Coast as well, with the last virtual conference that they hosted seeing over 1.4 million views via live stream. So I've been learning a lot through the building process, hopefully being more helpful with founders and mentoring them over time. So this has certainly been quite the experience, where I feel like that's one of the top things that I have learned. In fact, I think I noticed in chat, Christine on commenting as well. I think Christine has actually been at some of our events in the past, if I remember correctly. And of course, Christine also serves on Decode's board of advisors, where she's been really helpful for our founders and aspiring entrepreneurs as students think through the kind of opportunities that they have in the medtech space. So I currently serve as chair of the board alongside other wonderful people in the industry, like the CTO of Microsoft US, the chief privacy officer at Google, number of startup executives who have brought their startups public. And I think one of the biggest opportunities here is that in a nonprofit environment, it's a lot easier and a lot low pressure for students of all backgrounds to learn about entrepreneurship and whether or not that's something they even potentially want to explore. Oftentimes, at least when I was going through school myself, I never had the opportunity to explore in a very low pressure environment. And by the time I even learned about entrepreneurship, it was either you become a full-time founder and you take things really seriously, or, you kind of attend events that don't really have that playground to explore. So I think it's wonderful that now younger and younger have more students that are starting to explore and test whether or not that's something they want to pursue full time as a career. So having the exposure and awareness and ability to try things out, I think is extremely important, and especially in terms of enabling more founders of diverse backgrounds, right? They have to have representation, they have to have exposure as early as possible. So I do think that that's one of the major things I learned. And briefly, if I had to name kind of a second thing, is becoming more authentic with myself in terms of, I used to talk about the fund in terms of just our successes, like how many acquisitions we've had, how great our returns are. But I feel like over time, even in my conversations with LPs, I've started to talk about, let's be real. What are the real struggles that we've had? And what are the challenges that we've overcome? Even in classes where I teach students, I always tell them, there were experiences and particular times where I thought everything was going to fall apart. And this is specifically what I did to overcome those. I do think whether it's talking to students or working with LPs that you're, or even just business partners and other emerging managers, it's so much easier to build an authentic relationship when it's possible to talk about the real struggles that we're going through.
No, that's amazing. And it's a good segue for us to ask Brittany, is like, talk a little bit about the LP-GP fit, because you are doing a focus fund, and as you said, many of the LPs, they don't even understand, and they're like, okay, let me talk to my wife, whether they have the same problem. And this is such an important criteria, because not just for a focus fund, because if you're in an early stage fund, obviously you cannot go to the pension funds or the endowments or the sovereign wealth funds. You're a smaller fund, and then you're a focus, and then it becomes very, very narrow. So walk us through that journey, like when you decided to, like, okay, I and Jessica is gonna start raising this fund. Who are the LPs you targeted in your first fund, and walk us through the best practices that you found, like, okay, this is a good fit. And I know we all go through the first wrong things, talk to all the institutions, then come back and talk to ultra high net worth, but I would love to understand that journey and how you found that fit.
Definitely. Well, and I advise anybody here who's thinking about starting a fund to just start talking about it, get that feedback, get advice, because honestly, the first million was actually quite easy to fundraise, because it was all the people that I had already prefaced over the last 18 months that I want to start a fund, and they were already kind of sold on it. So the email I sent them was like, it's open, like it's ready, here's the LPA, and so I think that doing yourself a favor by pre-selling, almost by just asking for advice, was really helpful in getting us going. And actually that provided us a lot of momentum, because people were like, didn't you just start fundraising in June? You already have X raised. And it was like, So it made this sense of urgency, but it was actually like, because we were fundraising for 18 months, so do yourself a favor, get a head start there. What we've realized, and sometimes you don't know until you go to market, right? Like these new high net worth individuals, who's actually going to convert. And what we have found, it's very interesting, the profile of individual. It's women who are feminists, and they didn't realize that they needed to be fighting for women's health equality. So I have this long list called my list of shocking facts. And these are shocking facts about, the rates of women dying during pregnancy and how it's actually increasing. Myself as a millennial woman am twice as likely to die from childbirth than my own mother, and I talk about seatbelts. They are made for men's bodies. We have data that shows seatbelts kill women. It's not made for our bodies, and I just give maybe 3 of those, and people are, if they care about women, they're like, what? I did not know this, right? Like, you need to tell me more. This is unacceptable. So it's like those women, and then girl dads, men who have money and they have a daughter now and they just love her to pieces. And I tell them a few of these shocking facts, and they think, oh my God, well, I don't necessarily want to lead a period company, but I want my daughter to have good healthcare. And so if that's what you're doing, I care about that, And then I would say the third profile of person is someone who's made money from the healthcare sector, and they know that women's health is underfunded, under innovated in. And so they're, perhaps in it for good morals as well, but also definitely in it for the returns, because they know there's $1.1 trillion is how big the femtech industry is. And we've established that market size, because these are numbers that didn't even exist prior to Femtech Focus and Coyote establishing ourselves. And so they know that this is a giant market, and it just requires someone to be comfortable with the word vagina. And they meet me and Jess, and I have pink hair and uterus earrings. And they're like, yeah, seems like you're the one to be comfortable talking about vaginas for a living. So I'm going to put my money with you because you're literally leading the industry. So my feedback is, luckily for me, being a women's health fund, it kind of weeds out people who, aren't well behaved, let's say, and it brings in the people who are. The one thing is that is the educational piece for me. A lot of people still think I'm saying fintech, or I mean female founders only, and so I do bear the burden of educating, but luckily we've gotten pretty good at it, and also it's like a trending thing now, so we're capitalizing on how hot this topic is, this word femtech, but making sure that we're always backing ourselves up with data. So, I'm sure lots of people on this call are annoyed at founders that just use the word AI because they think that'll get them funding. And then you ask them a little bit about AI and they're like, actually don't know. So similarly for femtech, we're not just throwing that word around. We literally have the data to prove our thesis. So yeah.
If it's okay to briefly add on to what Brittany was saying, I couldn't agree more, because one of the biggest issues, so I'd been sitting on the advisory board for Yale's Digital Health Center. One of the biggest issues that we've seen in this space is that oftentimes data isn't representative of women's health. So if doctors and experts are looking at data that are predominantly, say, Caucasian men, of course, it's not going to be an accurate diagnosis. And it's also not just physical health as well. I'm not sure to what extent Brittany does work in the mental health space. That's extremely important for everyone, but particularly for women as well, because there's just going to be more kind of important critical points at which we need to support not just female founders, but also women in the workplace. And I think it's a piece that we're starting now to talk more about since COVID, where I think we're paying more attention to the importance of mental health and being supported, not just being well physically, but also being well whole-rounded as a human being. So really just wanted to agree with what Brittany was saying and kind of add those quick pieces.
No, I totally agree. And I think we have a question specifically for mental health for all the GPs at the end of this. And I will prefer anyone who wants to ask questions to our amazing panelists, please write it down on the chat and I'll start asking those questions. Now, I'll go to Lindsay, and I want to talk to you about, because you started the fund at $1.5 million. This is fund one. And a lot of people are writing those as a check in Series A or B. And I would love to walk through the portfolio construction, that how you thought like, okay, this is a super small fund, but I'm going to do it with whatever we have, and how I'm going to focus on these kind of companies. What's the check sizes I'm writing? Are there any re-ups? Are there any follow-ons? And what are the challenges that you have faced? Because it's always easy to have a portfolio construction when I have a $250 million fund, which is my size of the fund, or you have a $50 million fund or $25 million fund, because there are follow-ons, re-ups, and things that you can do. But for a fund of your size, I would love to understand, how you went through this. And it's a very smart thing. Like, okay, I have raised this, I'm going to go and invest because that's my track record. So yeah, please walk us through that. I think you're talking on mute.
Sorry. In the spirit of something that Shu was saying earlier, I think it's really important that people are honest about the realities of what it looks like. And one of the other trends that we haven't really spoken about, but I think specifically as we see women and minorities coming to the table, we're seeing this influx of emerging fund managers who are really changing the game. And I think fundamentally trying to rethink what venture capital looks like, specifically as it relates to democratizing access. And that to us is a really core and central theme to everything we do. So with that, I would say that for Fund One, because it was tiny, and again, we were doing this at a time where, now the sort of cultural conversation around female founders and funders is so expansive. It's everywhere you look. In 2016 and 17, people were looking at me like I was mad, like I had lost my mind that I would try and do this. And so with that, we knew that we only had a small amount of capital to make a big impact. And so we wrote relatively small checks out of that fund. And we knew that by and large, it would be a one check investment. So obviously we didn't have the freedom to sort of take, you know, half of the fund and hold it for follow on. We weren't really thinking proactively about recycling. We were thinking about how many great companies can we find and can we get checks in that we feel like are going to scale relatively quickly, so that we can prove that there is both an economic and a social benefit to what we're doing. It really was not, in terms of construction, I don't think it was more exhaustive than that. I think also, as the other women here can likely empathize, there is the construction that you have in your mind, and there's the fund model that you've worked on, and then there's the reality of how your fund actually shapes up, right? And that's an iterative process. It's one that you're constantly tweaking, that you're constantly in relationship with. So for Fund 2, we're very much thinking in a different way about how much follow-on we're withholding, what recycling looks like, how we want to support companies as they move forward. But for Fund 1, it was really about, you know, getting something in market, proving that there was value, that we were the right people to do it. And thankfully, we've been able to do that, even with, in terms of vintage, you know, it was a really fragile time for our companies when it came to COVID. Like, no one could have predicted that. And the fact that we've still seen the success rate that we have, and you know, the vast majority of our companies have followed on at higher valuations or are looking towards some sort of liquidity event in the next few years. We're really pleased to have been able to prove that. And I think that fundamentally, those things are what people care about more than they care about construction or modeling. I think oftentimes people ask those questions, and it's a great diligence check, you know, box to check in terms of knowing that your GPs have been thoughtful and intentional about it. But I also think that most prolific LPs understand the nature of it, which is iterative and evolving, and never as sort of linear and concrete as it is when you set out to build them.
No, I totally agree. I think the financial modeling space is more PE. Even at late stage, you look at the spreadsheet and it's still like, if you're not the lead investor, you're basically a follow-on and accept whatever valuations you get. I would love to talk, I would love you to talk a little bit about the democratization of VC that you are doing through Helm. I think that's a very powerful movement, and specifically, we want more women to write checks. And that is what I'm saying, like, you know, just don't be a mentor, write checks. If you are a believer of diversity, equity, inclusion, you want to support women, write checks, and we take smaller checks also. So would love to talk, go through that process, and what was your mindset in pushing that?
Again, it's always been central to everything we've done. So our mission is make it easy to invest in women. And what that means, if you unpack it, is not just affluent women, right? And men, and the sort of classism and, you know, different other political and social underpinnings that come with that. And I would also say, just as like a sort of preface to the answer and also a response to your question, one of the sort of realizations that I had, which I think is really central to this question, is that when we talk about feminism, you know, in terms of the history of this country, if you think about the definition of feminism being, you know, political, social, and economic equality, throughout history, we've really focused on social equality. And then as of late, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years, obviously, we've started to focus more on political equality. And we've seen that with the sort of emergence of women that are running and have secured a variety of different roles. But what we still never talk about is economic equality. And especially outside of social safety nets, right? So a broader cultural conversation. And the only way that you can talk about economic equality is providing different on-ramps for women and men at every stage of their lives and of their wealth and of where they are, and meeting people where they are. So one of the things that has been, you know, both a blessing and a burden, an opportunity and obstacle for me, has been, in order to allow people with much smaller checks to come in as LPs, it takes you a lot longer to raise the fund, right? And your energy is not going towards big institutions, only big institutions. It's also going towards women who it may be their first check as an LP. It may be the only one they can write for the foreseeable future. And I think that's really, really important to have those people on the cap table, especially when it comes to diversifying your LP base, not just your founders, but ensuring that your LP base is reflective of the world that we live in, and being really thoughtful about how, what that diversity looks like in terms of culture, in terms of race, in terms of class, in terms of where they are economically, in terms of what their views are. Like it's a much more, I almost feel like the way that we think about portfolio construction, we should think about LP construction, or like, I think that we give a lot of oxygen to portfolio construction, and yet I actually don't think that that ends up the way that we want it to, as much as if we were to think about who are the people who are going to help this fund and these companies grow, and who can add valuable perspectives beyond just their checks. So in that way, it has been, again, a really challenging thing, but also I think really important if we want to be leaders and show that it's possible. And I won't sort of spiral into the ways in which I think that the SEC and accreditation provide all sorts of issues that aren't necessary for folks and really keeping them down. But I also think continuing to find ways to sort of find loopholes or poke holes, and obviously while respecting and being in alignment with law. But I think that it's a conversation that we need to have a lot more. And the last thing that I would offer is, in order to meet people where they are, one of the other things that we realized is, like I mentioned earlier, going out to women and being really surprised that they were as reluctant as they were to invest in women. But the more and more that I've sat with that, and hundreds and thousands of women that I have spent the last 6 years talking to, the more that I realize it makes sense. Like if you've never made a for-profit investment before, it doesn't really make sense that you're going to come in as an LP. If you've never made an angel investment before, if you're financially illiterate, if you've never had exposure, if you have no idea what venture capital is, I understand that there's a discomfort and a reluctance on behalf of those women. And so what we did was create an angel network where people are able to pay a certain amount of money a year. And then we provide a 6-week module that really goes through everything from how you do it to what the landscape looks like, who the players are. And then we curate monthly deals where people can participate as part of an SPV. And so at that point, we're able to cultivate relationships with women who are new to the space, to provide them exposure, to give them education, to put them in community with other people. And then hopefully, as we continue along their investment journey with them, when they're ready to become an LP and that makes sense for them, they know that they have a safe place to land. So that is also a key part of what we have been thinking about as it relates to democratizing access. It's, again, really meeting people where they are and letting them grow at their own pace. And in a space that feels safe and comfortable, where there doesn't feel like this sort of pressure to show up in a bigger way financially than what they're able to do. So that's sort of how we're thinking about it and looking at it. And so far, I'm really pleased with the way that both our LPs and our community have continued to shape up.
No, absolutely. Thank you a lot, everybody, for attending. And we have just a minute left. So I'm going to give the time back to the, Elisa on High Water Woman, but I want to say one thing at the end. Is like the biggest takeaway is, like, as a woman, you're not only the CEO of your house, you're also CEO of your endeavor, what you're doing. So the mental health that actually Shua talked about is not just for entrepreneurs, but for GPs also, because we wear so many hats, and all those women, they're wearing so many hats, and not just convincing LPs and different kinds of LPs, where you're now, as Brittany said, that asking for 25K checks to a 5 million checks. So it's not easy. And for us, we need that support. But at the same time, I think we have to educate a lot of LPs that why we need that support. So thanks a lot, Brittany, Shua, and Lindsay. If you can share your Twitter or any other social media, LinkedIn, or emails and other things that any potential opportunities come towards your way, you can accept that. I will give it back to Elisa.
Thank you, Gayatri, and thank you everyone for attending and for sharing your knowledge with us. Excited to get this back out to our community on the replay as well. We'll capture all the resources, the great resources that were posted in the chat as well. So Thank you to our panelists for joining us today and for the incredible work that you do. Thank you to our supporters. Today was made possible in part by the MacArthur Foundation. And of course, thank you to our Highwater Women members who also support this work. So if you're interested in becoming a member of our network, please do so. You can find that information here at hwwimpact.org/membership. And if that's not of interest to you, we are a small nonprofit foundation, and our work is made possible through the support of folks like you. So please consider making a donation. Keep your eyes out for the upcoming session. I'll include that in the follow-up notes that will be shared with all of the panelists here, as well as the folks who attended, and as well as our member database. So keep an eye out for that as well. Once again, thank you everyone for coming today. Please post your information in the chat and we'll capture that and include that in the post meeting notes as well. Any other parting thoughts before we go? Excellent. We will see you next time.
Alyssa, if it's okay, you mentioned parting notes. If it's okay, since our panel is focused on capital allocation to this space, hopefully, I think Brittany, Lindsay, and I have been convincing to all of you on the importance of allocating capital to this space, not just funding female founders, but also female GPs, because we do need a stronger ecosystem overall. And I think women are in a very unique position where we have influence not just on our own financial decisions, but also on our broader ecosystem of family members around us. So would love to have your help in spreading the message in everything that we've shared together today about the importance of investing in women's health, investing in women's financial literacy, and investing in the long-term career success of women who are founders and GPs and business leaders in their own way. And would love to also tap into the leverage that larger institutions have. We can convince individuals to write 25K checks, but if we had one larger institution that decided to allocate just 0.1% of a multi-billion-dollar fund into this space, then we would have much more support for women that are doing amazing and world-changing, impactful work in this space. So would love to have all of your support. Thank you so much for hosting again as well.
Thank you, Cheryl. You absolutely have our support, and this is part of the mission of Highwater Women, is to empower women across all levels of the socioeconomic status and upcoming events. As you know, as I mentioned at the top, we teach financial literacy out in the community through a volunteer effort that we organize. We also have a venture capital segment that we're doing in partnership with Beyond the Billion. If you know those folks, Shelley Porges and Sarah Chen, and raising awareness and moving capital into this space. We're also looking at ways that Highwater Women can do more CAP intro style events. We're working on that, more to follow. If you have ideas on that, please be in touch with me directly afterwards. Would love to include you all in that.
Amazing. Thank you all so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.